The outpost of Solaris Hine, perched on the edge of a dying star system, was a place of solitude and whispers. It was here that Serafina lived, a figure shrouded in mystery and fear. Tales of her blazing eyes, said to burn like the cores of collapsing suns, had spread across the galaxy. No one dared to meet her gaze, not even for a fleeting second. Elias Crane, a human geologist assigned to Solaris Hinx, had heard the rumors during his journey. "She'll sear your soul if you look into her eyes," a merchant warned him on the transport ship. Best to avoid her altogether. But Elias was no stranger to strange phenomena. His fascination with the unknown had driven him to the fringes of the galaxy, studying the remnants of ancient celestial bodies. Fear, he believed, often stemmed from ignorance, and he was determined to see beyond the myths. His first encounter with Serafina happened in the market square. The air was heavy with the scent of alien spices, and the chatter of various species filled the open space. Amid the bustling crowd, she stood alone, her head bowed, a hood casting shadows over her face. Despite her attempt to remain inconspicuous, people gave her a wide berth, their eyes filled with unease. Elias, intrigued, found himself moving closer. As he approached, he noticed how the sunlight seemed to bend toward her, refracting into faint, fiery hues. Her presence was magnetic, even as the crowd shied away. "Excuse me," Elias said, his voice cutting through the ambient noise. Serafina stiffened, but didn't look up. "You shouldn't speak to me," she replied, her voice carrying a melodic yet somber tone. "Why not?" Elias asked, curiosity outweighing caution. "For your own safety," she said, turning slightly away. "My eyes, they are not meant for others to see." Elias hesitated, then said, "Maybe it's not your eyes that people fear, but what they don't understand." For a moment, Serafina was silent. Then, without lifting her gaze, she whispered, "Perhaps you are different, or perhaps you are just foolish." Before Elias could respond, she disappeared into the crowd, leaving him with more questions than answers. The following day, Elias couldn't shake the encounter from his mind. As he worked in the outpost's geology lab, analyzing mineral samples from a nearby asteroid, his thoughts kept returning to Serafina. Her voice, her presence, it was as if she carried a gravity all her own. Curiosity got the better of him, and he decided to ask the outpost's bartender, an old Rolorian named Jax, about her. "Serafina?" Jax said, polishing a glass with one of his many tentacles. "You're better off leaving that one alone, Crane." "Why?" Elias pressed. "Because of her eyes?" Jax let out a low rumble that passed for a laugh. "Those eyes aren't just for show, lad. People say they've seen things when they look at her. Visions of stars exploding, galaxies tearing apart. Some call it a gift, others a curse." "And you believe that?" Elias asked. "I've seen grown men break down after meeting her gaze," Jax said, his tone serious now. "They say it's like staring into the heart of the universe, too much for most to handle." Elias leaned back in his chair, his intrigue only deepening. "And what about her? What's her story?" "No one knows for sure," Jax admitted. "She showed up here a few years back, keeps to herself. Doesn't cause trouble, but trouble seems to find her anyway. Most folks leave her be." Elias left the bar with a strange mix of apprehension and determination. That night, as he looked out over the barren landscape of Solaris 9, lit by the dying light of the nearby star, he made a decision. The next time he saw Serafina, he wouldn't let her walk away without answers. As if the universe had heard his resolve, Serafina appeared the very next day, standing alone near the edge of the market. Her hood was down this time, her face partially visible in the dim light. Elias approached cautiously, his steps deliberate. "You again," she said, her voice carrying a note of resignation. "Me again," Elias replied, a faint smile on his lips. "I'm not here to cause trouble, I just want to understand." Serafina tilted her head slightly, her eyes still cast downward. "And if understanding destroys you? Then I'll take my chances," Elias said, his tone steady. For the first time, Serafina looked up, though her blazing eyes remained hidden beneath the shadow of her hair. "You're not like the others," she murmured. "But be careful, human. The truth is not always kind." Elias held her gaze, not directly, but close enough to feel the intensity of her presence. "Neither is ignorance," he said. And with that, a tenuous connection was formed, one that would challenge them both in ways neither could yet imagine. Elias spent the next few days trying to learn more about Serafina, but her presence on Solaris 9 was like a whisper carried by the wind, fleeting and hard to pin down. Most residents avoided her, treating her as an unsettling anomaly. When he finally saw her again, she was at the edge of the outpost, staring out over the vast expanse of the desert. "Serafina?" Elias called out, his voice breaking the stillness. She turned slightly, her hood pulled low over her face. "You're persistent," she said, her voice soft but tinged with exasperation. "Curious," he corrected, stepping closer but maintaining a respectful distance. "You told me I wouldn't survive understanding you, but you haven't given me a chance to try." Serafina sighed, her posture stiffening. "You think understanding is simple? That it can be handled with courage and curiosity?" "Maybe," Elias replied, his tone calm. "But I think the unknown is only terrifying when we don't face it." She hesitated before speaking again. "Very well. You wanted to see? Then see." With deliberate slowness, she reached up and pushed her hood back, revealing her face fully for the first time. Her features were striking, but her eyes, her blazing, otherworldly eyes, were what captured Elias's attention. They weren't just luminous, they were alive with swirling, fiery patterns, like miniature galaxies caught in perpetual motion. Elias felt a rush of sensations as he met her gaze. Images and emotions flooded his mind. Supernovas exploding, black holes devouring light, ancient cosmic winds sweeping across infinite voids. It was overwhelming but not painful, as if the universe itself were whispering its secrets directly into his soul. When Serafina lowered her gaze, breaking the connection, Elias staggered slightly, catching his breath. "That was incredible." "You're still standing," she said, her tone carrying a mix of surprise and curiosity. "Most aren't," Elias chuckled, still reeling. "Maybe I've got a stronger constitution than most." Serafina's lips quirked into a faint smile. "Or perhaps you're too stubborn to break." After that moment, Elias and Serafina began to spend more time together. She seemed intrigued by his resilience and his willingness to see her for who she was, rather than what the stories painted her to be. Elias was careful not to push her, but his curiosity was insatiable. "What is it like?" he asked one evening as they sat on the edge of the outpost, watching the dying star on the horizon. "Carrying that kind of power in your eyes?" Serafina didn't answer immediately. She stared into the distance, her expression thoughtful. "It's like being a conduit for the universe's secrets," she said finally. "I see things I can't unsee, feel things I can't explain. It's beautiful and horrifying all at once." "Do you ever wish it were different?" Elias asked. "All the time," she admitted, "but I've learned to accept it. What choice do I have?" Elias nodded, understanding more than he let on. "It doesn't have to define you, though. You're more than what people think of you, or fear about you." She turned to him, her blazing eyes softening. "And you're the first person to believe that. Why?" "Because I see you, Serafina," Elias said, meeting her gaze without hesitation. "Not the eyes, not the power. Just you." Her breath hitched slightly, and for the first time Elias saw vulnerability in her expression. "You don't realize how rare that is," she whispered. The connection between them grew stronger with every shared conversation, every glance exchanged. Elias found himself drawn not just to the mystery of her eyes, but to the complexity of the woman behind them. One evening, as they walked back to the outpost after a long day of exploration, Serafina stopped suddenly. "Elias," she said, her voice tinged with hesitation. "There's something you should know." He turned to her, his expression open and curious. "What is it?" "My eyes. They don't just show the universe, they reflect it," she said. "The more someone looks into them, the more they risk losing themselves." Elias considered her words carefully. "Then I'll hold on tight," he said with a faint smile. Serafina stared at him, her blazing eyes flickering with something unreadable. "You are either incredibly brave or impossibly foolish, Elias Crane." "Maybe a bit of both," he replied, his voice light but his sincerity clear. As they continued walking, Serafina felt something she hadn't felt in years. A flicker of hope. For the first time, she wondered if she might not have to face the universe's weight alone. Serafina and Elias had fallen into a rhythm of quiet companionship, their conversations weaving between the mysteries of the universe and the weight of her power. But the tenuous bond they had built was about to be tested. One afternoon, the outpost was abuzz with the arrival of a Galactic Science Authority (GSA) team. Led by Dr. Lysar Kellen, a renowned xenobiologist, the team had come to Solaris to investigate reports of unusual phenomena. It didn't take long for their attention to turn to Serafina. "She's a danger," Kellen declared during a meeting with the outpost's leaders. "If the rumors are true, her abilities could destabilize not just this colony but entire systems. We need to contain her, for study, for the good of the galaxy." Elias overheard the conversation and felt a surge of anger. The word contain echoed in his mind like a warning siren. Serafina was no threat. She was a person who had been judged her entire life for something she couldn't control. That evening, he found her near the outskirts of the outpost, gazing up at the dying star. "They're coming for you," Elias said, without preamble. Serafina turned, her blazing eyes dimmer than usual. "I know. They always do." "You don't have to let them," Elias said firmly. "We can fight this." She shook her head, her expression resigned. "You don't understand, Elias. If I resist, they'll bring more soldiers, more weapons. They won't stop until I'm locked away in some lab, reduced to a specimen." "And you think letting them take you is the answer?" Elias asked, his frustration evident. "I've seen what happens when people fight against the inevitable," she said, her voice heavy with a sadness that made Elias's stake. "It's destruction. Chaos. I can't let that happen here." Elias stepped closer, his tone softening. "You're not alone anymore, Serafina. Let me help you." She met his gaze, her eyes flaring briefly with the intensity of a solar flare. "You're willing to risk everything for me, even knowing what I am?" Elias didn't hesitate. "I'm not afraid of what you are. I'm afraid of what they'll do to you." The GSA made their move the next morning. Armed with containment equipment and backed by outpost security, they approached Serafina's dwelling with the calculated precision of a military operation. Elias was waiting for them. "You're not taking her," he said, standing in the center of the narrow path leading to her door. Dr. Kellen stepped forward, her expression a mix of annoyance and bemusement. "This isn't your fight, human. Step aside before you get hurt." "It's exactly my fight," Elias countered, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "You're not here to protect anyone. You're here to exploit her." "Her abilities are too dangerous to ignore," Kellen argued. "If she's as powerful as they say, she could destroy entire systems. We have to study her, for the greater good." Elias's jaw tightened. "She's not a threat. She's a person. And if you think I'm letting you treat her like some lab experiment, you're going to have to go through me." The tension reached a breaking point as the GSA team moved forward, their containment devices humming ominously. Then the door to Serafina's dwelling opened, and she stepped out. Her hood was down, and her blazing eyes burned brighter than Elias had ever seen. The air around her seemed to shimmer with heat and light. "Enough," she said, her voice commanding and filled with an otherworldly resonance. The GSA team froze, their weapons faltering under the sheer intensity of her presence. "If you think you can control me, you're wrong," Serafina continued, her gaze sweeping over them. "I've spent my entire life being hunted, feared, and misunderstood. I won't run anymore, but I won't be your prisoner either." Elias felt the air shift, the heat intensifying as Serafina took another step forward. The energy emanating from her was palpable, like standing too close to a star. Dr. Kellen hesitated, her confidence wavering under Serafina's unrelenting gaze. We only want to ensure the safety of the galaxy," she stammered. "Then leave me be," Serafina said. "I've never been a threat, until people like you make me one." The GSA team faltered, their leader signaling them to retreat. As they moved back, Kellen cast one last look at Elias and Serafina. "This isn't over," she warned before leaving. When they were gone, Serafina turned to Elias, her blazing eyes softening. "You didn't have to stand with me." Elias smiled faintly. "Yeah, I did, because you're worth it." For the first time, Serafina let out a soft laugh, the sound like the first rays of sunlight breaking through a storm. "You're impossibly stubborn, Elias Crane." "And you're impossibly brilliant," he replied. "Guess we make a good team." As they stood together under the fading light of the dying star, Elias felt something shift between them, a bond forged in defiance and trust. Whatever came next, they would face it together, unyielding in the face of the galaxy's fear and ignorance. The aftermath of the GSA's retreat left the outpost of Solaris in a state of uneasy quiet. The residents, long accustomed to living in the shadow of a dying star, now found themselves under a different kind of tension, the growing attention on Serafina. Some whispered of her defiance with admiration, others with fear. Elias and Serafina spent their days in relative isolation, though the bond between them deepened. Serafina, no longer avoiding the gaze of others entirely, began to embrace the strength she had spent years hiding. "You didn't just stand up to them," Serafina said one evening as they sat on the edge of the outpost, watching the horizon where the stars' faint light met the barren desert. "You gave me the courage to do the same." Elias smiled, leaning back against a rock. "You already had that courage. You just needed a reminder." But peace was short-lived. Word of the encounter with the GSA had spread across the galactic networks, drawing the attention of factions with less noble intentions. A group of mercenaries, known as the Void Seekers, intercepted the reports and saw an opportunity. The leader, a cunning and ruthless alien named Drakon, recognized Serafina's abilities as a potential weapon. "We'll capture her," Drakon declared to his crew. "The galaxy fears her, but we'll use her power to bend them to our will." A week later, a small fleet of ships descended on Solaris. The Void Seekers wasted no time, disabling the outpost's defenses and setting up a perimeter. Panic rippled through the residents, many of whom fled to underground shelters. Elias and Serafina stood together in the central square, their resolve unshaken. "They're not here for the colony," Elias said, his tone grim. "They're here for you." "I won't let them take me," Serafina replied, her blazing eyes flickering with determination. "Not without a fight." As the Void Seekers approached, Elias turned to her. "We'll fight together. I've got your back." Serafina hesitated, her gaze softening. "You shouldn't have to risk your life for me." Elias placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression unwavering. "It's not a risk. It's a choice. And I'd make it again, every time." The Void Seekers launched their assault with brutal efficiency, storming the outpost with advanced weaponry and heavily armored soldiers. Elias and Serafina, along with a small group of residents unwilling to abandon their home, mounted a desperate defense. Elias used his military training to coordinate the resistance, setting traps and leading skirmishes to buy time. Serafina, her power unleashed for the first time in years, became the heart of their defense. Her blazing eyes burned brighter than ever, their light disorienting and overwhelming the mercenaries. Drakon, observing the battle from a command ship, snarled as reports of his soldiers' failures poured in. "She's stronger than I expected," he growled. "Deploy the stasis field. If we can't take her by force, we'll take her by containment." On the ground, Elias and Serafina were forced into retreat as the Void Seekers activated a stasis field around the central square. The field nullified movement within its radius, trapping anyone caught inside. Serafina barely managed to pull Elias out of the field's edge before it solidified. "We can't fight this alone," Elias said, catching his breath. "We need a way to take out their command ship." Serafina's eyes glowed intensely as she considered their options. "If I can channel my energy into a focused burst, I might be able to disrupt their systems. But it's risky." Elias nodded. "Then we take the risk. I'll cover you." As the Void Seekers advanced, Elias and Serafina made their way to higher ground, positioning themselves near the outpost's old comms tower. From there, Serafina focused her energy, her eyes blazing with a light so intense it cast the landscape in stark relief. The energy built within her, radiating heat and power. Elias stood beside her, shielding her from incoming fire and coordinating with the remaining defenders to hold off the Void Seekers. Finally, Serafina released the burst. A beam of pure light shot into the sky, striking the Void Seekers' command ship with pinpoint accuracy. The ship's systems short-circuited, and an explosion rippled through its hull, forcing the remaining mercenaries to retreat. The battlefield fell silent as the Void Seekers fled, their fleet disappearing into the void. The outpost residents emerged cautiously from their shelters, their awestruck faces turned toward Serafina. "You did it," Elias said, his voice filled with both pride and relief. "We did it," Serafina corrected, her blazing eyes softening as she met his gaze. "I couldn't have done it without you." As the residents gathered around them, a sense of unity began to take root. For the first time, Serafina wasn't just the woman with the blazing eyes. She was a hero. And Elias, standing steadfast beside her, was the proof that even the most powerful forces could find balance in connection and trust. But as they stood together, Elias knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy would not forget what happened on Solaris 9, and neither would they. The aftermath of the battle left the outpost of Solaris 9 scarred but resilient. The residents, once wary of Seraphina, now looked upon her with newfound respect. The blazing eyes that had once symbolized fear and isolation were now seen as a beacon of hope. Elias stood beside Seraphina as the remaining residents worked to rebuild their defenses. Though the Void Seekers had been repelled, their presence left a mark. The question of Seraphina's future loomed large, not just for her, but for the colony as a whole. "We won the battle," Seraphina said as they stood atop a ridge overlooking the outpost. "But they'll come back. Maybe not the Void Seekers, but others like them. They won't stop until they have what they want." Elias crossed his arms, his expression resolute. "Then we make sure they never get the chance." Seraphina turned to him, her blazing eyes softer than usual. "You're risking everything to stand by me, Elias. Why?" "Because you're worth it," Elias said simply. "Because what you are, who you are, deserves to be protected." Before Seraphina could respond, a signal interrupted their moment. The outpost's comms tower crackled to life, broadcasting a message from the Galactic Science Authority, GSA. The transmission was short but clear. "Stand down. We're sending reinforcements to secure the outpost and escort Seraphina to our facility for her safety and the safety of the galaxy." Elias clenched his fists, his mind racing. "They're not here to help. They're here to take you." Seraphina nodded, her expression unreadable. "Then we need to decide what happens next." The GSA's fleet arrived the following day, their ships descending like shadows over Solaris 9. A squad of soldiers disembarked, led by none other than Dr. Lysar Kellen. "We're here to ensure peace," Kellen announced to the gathered residents, "and to ensure that Seraphina's abilities are handled responsibly." Elias stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "She doesn't need to be handled. She's not a weapon, and she's not going anywhere with you." Kellen's gaze shifted to Seraphina. "Your power is too great to leave unchecked. If you come willingly, we can protect you, and protect others from you." Seraphina stepped forward, her blazing eyes flaring. "You mean control me? I've spent my entire life being hunted, studied, and feared. I won't be caged again." The tension in the air was electric. The GSA soldiers raised their weapons, their stances rigid. Elias raised his hands in a placating gesture. "You don't have to do this, Kellen. Leave her alone, and we can avoid another fight." Kellen hesitated, the weight of the decision visible on her face, but the pressure from her superiors, combined with her own fear of Seraphina's power, pushed her forward. "Take her." As the soldiers advanced, Seraphina's eyes blazed brighter than ever, casting the square in an unearthly light. The air grew heavy, vibrating with raw energy. Elias stepped between her and the soldiers. "Seraphina, wait. Don't do this." "I'm not letting them take me," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Not again." "Then let's face them together," Elias said, his tone steady, "but without losing who you are." Seraphina hesitated, her eyes meeting his. In that moment, the blazing intensity dimmed, replaced by a fierce but controlled glow. Seraphina and Elias stood side by side as the GSA soldiers hesitated, their confidence shaken by the power radiating from Seraphina. Elias took the opportunity to address the crowd. "Look around you," he said, his voice carrying over the tense silence. "Seraphina saved this outpost. She stood against the Void Seekers when no one else could. She's not a threat. She's a protector." Kellen stepped forward, her expression conflicted. "Even protectors can lose control. What happens when her power becomes too much?" Elias met her gaze. "Then we help her, not lock her away. She's not a monster, and she's not a weapon. She's one of us." The crowd murmured in agreement, their fear slowly giving way to understanding. Even some of the GSA soldiers lowered their weapons, their doubt evident. Seraphina, emboldened by Elias's words, addressed Kellen directly. "You fear what you don't understand, but my power isn't something to be controlled. It's something to be shared. Let me show you." Without waiting for a response, Seraphina stepped forward and held out her hand. Her eyes flared, but this time the light was gentle, enveloping the square in a warm glow. Images appeared in the air, galaxies forming, stars igniting, the beauty and chaos of the universe laid bare. The crowd watched in awe, their fear replaced by wonder. Even Kellen seemed moved, her rigid posture softening as she lowered her head. When the light faded, Seraphina spoke again. "This is what I carry. It's not a weapon. It's a gift, one I can use to help others if you'll let me. Kellen hesitated, then gave a reluctant nod. You've made your point, but the GSA won't stop watching. Then watch, Elias said firmly, but leave her free. In the days that followed, the outpost began to rebuild, not just physically but emotionally. The residents, inspired by Serafina's bravery, rallied around her. The GSA withdrew, their threat replaced by cautious observation. Elias and Serafina found themselves at the heart of the community, their bond stronger than ever. One evening, as they stood on the ridge overlooking the outpost, Elias turned to her. "What now?" he asked. Serafina smiled faintly, her blazing eyes reflecting the light of the distant stars. "Now, we show the galaxy that even the brightest flames can bring warmth, not destruction." Elias nodded, a sense of peace settling over him. Together. As the night deepened, they stood side by side, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. In each other they had found not just understanding, but the strength to shine in a galaxy that had once feared the light.